moving on to Tiffany. Tiffany is the VP of product at Atlassian. She leads the product team for Jira software, Jira Align, and Bitbucket. Tiffany joined Atlassian in 2019 and moved from the Bay Area to Sydney, Australia, where she resides today. She brings her operator experience to support enterprise startups as an advisor and as an angel investor. By the way, we're going to have to play her pre-recorded talk today because Sydney is experiencing weather issues that is affecting the connection for Tiffany.
When you're introducing yourself, your instinct is to highlight your biggest successes. But given my talk is about how we can redefine and normalize failure, I'm going to set the tone by starting with some of my career lowlights. So let's start by rewinding to my second job out of university, when I joined what I thought was my dream company, Silicon Graphics. For those of you too young to have heard of it, SGI was famous in the late 90s for bringing to life the CGI dinosaurs from Jurassic Park. At Stanford, I programmed on SGI boxes we named after raptors, and I was so excited to be a PM for a company responsible for so much innovation in graphics and supercomputing. I was building software being used by NASA. So a girl geek dream come true, right? Well, SGI was my biggest lesson in tech and business. This was when x86 boxes from HP and Dell were blowing into the market, and SGI's final move to switch from their proprietary MIPS to Intel's Titanium processor architecture was simply too late. While numerous classmates went to this new company called Google, here I was seeing my SGI stock plummet below $1. From this brutal failure, I learned a lesson that would stay with me for the rest of my career. In tech, disruption happens fast for even the biggest predators in the food chain, and understanding the interplay between technology innovation and the business landscape is critical to survive and thrive. My second failure hit me psychologically more than others because it was the first and only time I've been fired. Ever the overachiever, being fired was not a failure that I had ever fathomed. But at my first startup 10 years into my career, I put in 110%, thrilled with the startup excitement of working all hours to make impact. My job was building a go-to-market strategy for a new cloud storage technology, launching the product and convincing analysts we'd created a new product category every CIO needed to buy. Now, my strategy was ultimately successful. The company reached IPO. The market category today is over $10 billion. However, the CEO and I had not seen eye to eye on numerous issues, and this experience taught me how important culture fit is. Most startups are under high pressure to succeed and do it quickly, so not all leaders are going to invest in creating a sustainable culture. You need to do your diligence to get the real story and understand if it's an environment you can personally thrive in. I had not and jumped in without doing my homework, so market success, but personal failure. I went on to launch 3 more startups, including a spectacular failure that burned through $50 million before I came to my current role at Atlassian as VP of Product. But I'm the leader I am today because of the lessons learned from all of these failures. And I'm so excited to be here with all of you today to talk about why I believe embracing failure has the potential to change the trajectory of women in leadership. Now, recognition of the value of having female leaders is thankfully becoming much more widespread as study after study proves out the bottom line benefits of diversity. But organizations and women themselves are still struggling to find ways to correct the leadership imbalance. There's been a lot of focus on how important the role of advocates play in this ecosystem in supporting women and creating opportunities. However, now as a mother with both a son and a daughter, I've started to recognize the differences in how society and I myself perceive success and failure differently based on gender. And because of this unconscious bias, I believe there's an opportunity for a mindset shift around risk and failure for women. Without deeply examining our personal and collective expectations of perfection in our careers as women, we won't be able to increase our risk tolerance to seek out the opportunities that I believe will truly challenge us. First, do women even want these leadership roles? The answer is yes. BCG and Heidrick & Struggles, an executive recruiting firm, surveyed more than 750 female and male senior tech leaders last year on a range of career topics. They confirmed what I believe we all collectively feel, which is there's no ambition gap. Women in tech want a seat at every table all the way to the top. So what are the steps along the way where men and women deviate in their career paths that results in this leadership divide? Well, one of the most interesting stats from this study is around career pivot points. Both men and women agreed that changing employers was critical to career advancement. But interestingly, while 80% of the male leaders surveyed had been at more than 3 companies, only 53% of these female leaders had. Why are men making the moves necessary to advance their careers while most female leaders are staying put and trying to earn those opportunities over longer tenures with the same employers? Maybe the answer is in risk tolerance differences. That study also found that there was a 15% gap in risk tolerance between gender for leaders in R&D functions, but interestingly, no difference in the business leaders. Maybe this is because women in tech are often fighting this perception that they have lower technical skills. I know I felt that throughout my career, I had to triple check that I was right on anything technical before I shared my opinion. But the insidious power of this pattern of upholding perfection then translates into how often we aim for promotions in or inside our company. This same study confirmed that 41% of women surveyed went for multiple promotions where they didn't meet all the qualifications compared to 51% of men. So you start to see where that gap opens up. After looking at these stats, are you wondering if I'm telling you to start job hopping, doing a whole string of failed startups? Absolutely not. Please do not let the takeaway be that more jobs automatically equals more success. You need to take a path that's true to you. But I'm hoping with this talk that by having more awareness about our views on failure, we can all more consciously consider the opportunities we choose or don't choose to go for. In the last few years, there's been a lot of discussion about how the most valuable employees will increasingly need to be T-shaped to adapt to quickly changing opportunities and environments. Companies need to be more agile as every company becomes a software company. And that means they need their teams and leaders to be as well. T-shaped knowledge means you have this deep level of knowledge in one area and a wider array of knowledge across other areas to support that deep core competency. Essentially, you're a generalist with a specialization. And I think I unknowingly built my career this way because I had a couple key things I understood that I did well early on, and those were areas that I honed with each opportunity I took on. And I had a lot of curiosity about technologies and business that I fed through the different companies I joined over the 2 decades of my career. In high school, I was torn between my love of journalism and programming, but I went down the CS path. In university, I couldn't decide between software and hardware, so I studied both CS and EE, and I realized I loved learning about all kinds of tech and sharing my knowledge. As I started working, I realized I was good at communicating complex concepts to many audiences. For example, new technologies to analysts or customers. Through various roles that started in software development, but then spanned across product marketing, product management, and a bit of everything in startup land, I honed my ability to create new categories of B2B products and consider that my specialty or the vertical part of my team. The horizontal part of my team spans technologies that include everything from wireless networking to supercomputers, cloud infrastructure, security, and now dev tools. I've also spanned business models and company types, from huge tech companies like Intel to 10-person startups and rocket ships like VMware and now Atlassian. My startup roller coaster was tumultuous, 4 companies in 10 years. And my resume could be read in very different ways. Having worked at so many companies can be a flag that someone has failed a lot and a negative factor for recruiters. On the other hand, 2 of the 4 startups I launched have reached IPO or multi-billion-dollar valuations, which is a much higher hit rate than the average of 90% failure. I chose to trust my own definition of success based on lessons learned, but that doesn't mean I didn't doubt myself a lot. But ultimately, that scrappy startup drive is why the best manager I've had in my career recruited me to join him at Atlassian to help scale the company's growth. At Atlassian, I lead a really awesome team of PMs that drive our Agile and DevOps portfolio of products to help all companies build great software. My personal challenge, though, in coming in as a senior leader is that I felt like I was expected to know all the answers to help my team perform at their best. In a startup, Managing with ambiguity was necessary for everyday survival. In my last startup as COO, I handled everything from our product strategy to sales calls and leading our fundraising. I was perfect at zero of these things, but I had to move it all forward to give us a fighting chance. So I just did the best I could. In Atlassian, as with any multi-1,000 person tech company, roles become more specialized and there's overwhelming amounts of data. As a company, Atlassian is ranked one of the best places to work year after year. And what I found is a large part of that is a strong philosophy based on empowered autonomy, built around our core values you see here, that I can attest people live to every day. Teams work as triads, product management, design, and engineering, and are expected to build their own strategies, goals, and plans. That means leaders above these layers aren't directing work or micromanaging their plans, so what's their job? I asked myself this a lot the first year. Wasn't I supposed to come up with brilliant strategies for them to test and execute? What I found was that empowered autonomy isn't magic. Teams needed to feel aligned to larger goals and understand the bigger picture of where we were going and why in an agile organization that's moving fast. Coordinating work across all these teams created complex challenges. Working with an executive coach and with a lot of support from my team, I'm proud to say I've been pushed to grow a lot as a leader in Atlassian and embrace failure in different ways. I've learned that easy problems don't make it up the chain. I learned I needed to feel comfortable putting out ideas that may be wrong and not measure my worth as a leader by their success. Early in your career, you're rewarded for great execution, but as a senior leader, my job is to push the thinking and likely fail a lot as I help my team solve more and more complex challenges. I share my experience candidly because embracing failure is hard, I think, at every stage of your career. When I started working with that coach I mentioned, who has a background in neuroscience and psychology, she helped me better understand the struggle was shared by many other female leaders and how much gender can actually play a role. Women look at failure sometimes in a different way. We're the first or the few oftentimes in our company or team, so we feel more pressure to nail it. We owe it to the women who paved the way, or we're paving the way, or we think there are others around us expecting us to fail who we need to prove wrong. If we choose to have children, we're often the ones taking more time off during prime career years, so we need to plan our moves out more carefully for an abundant set of reasons. My own viewpoints on failure and success were formed at an early age, with my front seat view of my parents' immigrant experience. I picked this Darwin quote because my parents were the ultimate role models for using failure to adapt. They were forced to leave their home country of Vietnam in 1979 due to a situation sadly not too unlike current events unfolding in the world. They eventually escaped to America after near-death experiences on the open ocean. I was born soon after they made it to wintry Minnesota with all their hopes and dreams in a new country. And I saw them start over again and again every time they saw a chance to do better. Without high school diplomas, they did everything from hourly tailoring work in Minnesota to working at a textile plant in North Carolina, and then relocating to California for the new opportunities springing up in Silicon Valley in the 80s. They left at the chance to escape East Coast winters. You can't tell from this happy photo, but my parents hated the cold, and it was just the one thing they just couldn't adapt to. My parents found jobs eventually assembling hardware for the first generation of Silicon Valley companies, including Amdahl, a big IBM mainframe company. They would sometimes bring home discarded parts for my sister and I to play with, and this early presence of computer hardware in our home started my interest in tech, which led to high school programming classes. They lectured me very little, though, on what classes to take, but encouraged me in every activity or sport I wanted to try, whether it was guitar or math club. I saw in how they built their careers that mistakes and failures weren't things to be ashamed of, but an opportunity to learn and build from. They eventually became successful small business owners and funded my pricey university education. But the priceless lesson they taught me was the necessity of failure in that messy path to your full potential. One memory that has always stayed with me was the time when one of my uncles asked my dad, why not have another kid so he might have a son? My dad's reply was that girls and boys are the same in America. From the experiences I know we all share, we know things are not equal yet, and there are many challenges for all underrepresented groups. Though progress has been made, there's still a long road ahead for my dad's dream to be true, and even bigger challenges around the world. But we do need to celebrate the progress we and all the women before us have made so that we can keep inspiring each other to push for better. So maybe my dad's granddaughter will experience this equality. In this spirit, I asked several women leaders in tech that I've had the privilege of working with throughout my career to share their stories. The first woman I'm sharing about is Betty Janot, an amazing product marketer I've known now for over 16 years, since our days sharing an office at VMware. She's now Senior Director of Product Marketing there in her second stint. Similar to me, she had some rocky starts early in her career. Betty entered the job market in the initial rise of the dot-com boom, but witnessed firsthand the graveyard that followed with the crash. She shared that she and her teams were being asked to apply winning playbooks from brick and mortar go-to-market that simply didn't work. Several of her companies went under, and the key lesson she learned was that playbooks in tech have to be updated constantly as the markets change. Being part of those failures, though, helped her shape how she built business strategies the rest of her career. Her second big failure came much later in her career in the guise of one of the first open source unicorns, Docker. She shared there as the VP of marketing, they tried to do too many things too early, from having a developer business, open source community, enterprise business. She and her teams were stretched way too thin and didn't deliver enough on any of those fronts, burning out the team and damaging ecosystem relationships. Her lesson learned was that as a startup, focus on one thing at a time. Test for success or fail fast, and then pick a milestone for when to figure out the next business strategy. Wise words. The second woman I'm honored to share about is Kathy Metcalf. She's a program director at Atlassian and my right-hand woman. In 2010, she'd already had an extensive career in the banking industry in Australia. Kathy then took on an ambitious project to make it frictionless to move between the 4 main banking institutions that dominate Australia. The idea was to give consumers a lifetime unique address that could move with you. But what started out well then fell apart when one and then all the 4 banks backed out. She shared it was a huge learning on how two-sided network markets operate and the power of an oligopoly. Kathy needed that lesson for the next time her team took a run at this with a real-time payments product 8 years later, with more wisdom and determination from that initial painful failure experience. She and her team were much more successful. Sometimes you need multiple attempts at big changes, was her takeaway. So look at that failure as a necessary stepping stone. Then, a few years later, recognizing the passion she had for tech businesses, she sought to join the biggest tech company in the Australian ecosystem, Atlassian. She did her due diligence and even networked with a few PM execs before applying. Unfortunately, there wasn't a fit with the PM roles open at that time, but she was offered a program manager role. She initially wasn't sure if it would be right for her, but she ultimately decided that the learning she would do in Atlassian was more important than the job role or title, and she took that job. Kathy ended up tripling her team over the next 2 years and is an amazing chief of staff to me and our business unit of over 600 people at Atlassian. I also couldn't live without her, so I'm so thankful she didn't stop at her initial job application failure. What a privilege for me to be able to share Betty and Kathy's stories, and what great examples of how failure can actually drive success throughout your career. I can only imagine how many more stories we have in this audience today. So I want to end my talk by encouraging all of you to help me in redefining and destigmatizing failure by telling your stories. We must crush these expectations of perfection we put on ourselves as women in tech by showing the full picture of how we've arrived where we are through the scrapes and bumps. I'm not talking about citing every little failure you've made and being hypercritical of yourself, but share when you've learned something from a failure and normalize these critical parts of our career growth. During job interviews, highlight what you've learned from failures, not just the successes. Second, I want all of us to be more aware of how fear of failure plays into our risk tolerance. Ask yourself how you can play it less safe, whether it's small things or big things. Take a small but habit-forming risk. Make it a point to share your ideas in a forum at work that scares you. If you love your current company or role, ask for more responsibility or more visibility. For example, a one-on-one with a leader in your company other than your manager. If you suspect you may be approaching a plateau where you are, start mapping that T for yourself and actively network to build relationships that you can tap into for future adventure. As women in tech, we all know innovation requires failure. Your career is about innovating the best of you, so embrace and welcome failure into it. Thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to connecting with many of you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to Tiffany for sending us this video over so that we could make sure that we didn't have problems despite all the weather issues that she was dealing with.